Okay, so we are going to begin the Nantucket Conservation Commission meeting for August 14th, 2019. I'd like to remind everybody to please silence your cell phones. If you need to have a conversation, please leave the room to have your conversation. If you need to come up and address the board, please come up and speak clearly into the microphones. The sound system is difficult, so as close as possible. The following items are continued under notices of intent. We have Mary D. Starr at 19 East Creek Road, Gregory Reyes at 19 East Creek Road, Lottie Leshley, QPRT, and Jan Leshley, QPRT, at 65 Squam Road, and 115 Baxter Road LLC and 117 Baxter Road LLC at 115 and 117 Baxter Road. They're all continued to August 28th. And now I'd like to invite anybody up who has public comment on items not being heard today. Yes.
Good evening, Maria Zoda, 3 Dionis Beach Road. Excuse me. On behalf of the property owners who are allowed access to Little Dionis Beach via the way, see Land Court Document 2799, we are requesting use of the ladder that extends from the property at 25 East Trisman to the beach. Since we will have to walk from the way to the edge of 25 Eastman property line, we expect the owners to allow this and not consider it trespassing. A simple statement from both the commission and the property owner will suffice us in this regard. We request this action to be addressed at this meeting, April 14th, 2019.
August 14th. Maria, has the property owner agreed?
I have no contact with the property owner. I'd only have my neighbors calling me, asking me what we should do, and this was what they wanted me to do. So.
I don't know if we have the right.
Yeah, I don't think we have the right to do that.
Well, is that ladder permitted?
We are hearing that item tonight.
Well, essentially, because of your actions on the bluff, those of us can't access the beach safely, and I have people calling me, asking me what we can do, and
So what I would suggest, the only way you'll be able to use their ladder, which is on private property, is to contact them directly and have them allow you. Otherwise, you guys can permit your own set of stairs or your own ladder that you can remove and take down so that you guys have access.
Is
That's
there
something we can
engineer here
control.
tonight?
Yes.
Could he contact the property owners for us?
Again, that's not, yeah, that's not, right. Unfortunately, that's not within our jurisdiction to allow.
Okay, well, I think it's a situation that you need to monitor what happens to that dune in the future. If you're going to allow that excess amount of sand in the spring and in the fall, it's going to continue to be a problem for those of us that would like to use the beach.
Thank you for your concerns.
Jeff, did you get a copy of this letter?
Yes,
Yeah.
I did. Thank you.
Okay. Any other public comment? Okay, seeing not, we're going to move into the public hearing, notices of intent, and we're going to start with Gisela Leinhard at 11 Jonathan Way.
I'd like to ask for a continuance until the next meeting.
Okay, so that will continue until August 28th?
Yes, please.
Okay, so we will move forward then with Andrew O'Brien Living Trust and Sonia Anderson Living Trust at 13 C Street.
For the applicant, Art Gasparo, Nantucket Engineering. This is the second public hearing before you for the creation of an access way down to Hither Creek. And we were waiting for a file number, which has since been issued. To briefly go over the project, it's the same, there was an order of conditions previously issued for the exact same project, which had expired. And so we've made the exact same proposal as before, and it's a grass walking path through a pedestrian easement to a set of timber stairs down the coastal bank, elevated timber walkway across the dune to a portion of an elevated fiber grate walkway across the salt marsh to get to mean high water. And the work would all be done by hand labor. No machines are proposed down there. We have helical anchors proposed to minimize disturbance to the salt marsh, which would be installed by a portable driver that could be run by two men. It's got handles on both sides and essentially would auger in the supports so that we don't have to actually dig the 4x4s in the salt marsh. And we believe it meets the performance standards. It is a water dependent use under the regulations. I'd be happy to try to address any questions or concerns there may be with the application.
Questions? My only question is about the grass path. Are they just going to mow what's currently there, or are they gonna like try and lay sod down?
Right now, it's a bit of a planting bed kind of area, so the idea would be that it would be like a turf grass walking path.
Okay.
I don't know what else you could really do now, whether it was going to be sod or seeded. I don't know, but it's so narrow as it is. We only have a 5-foot pedestrian access way. So, and I've shown the walkway only being 3 feet wide. So, I suppose it could be maybe mulch or something else, but I would have thought that the path is only in the buffer zone as well. That the grass would be, the preferred alternative.
Yeah, I guess the one concern I have when I read through the previous order, it said no fertilizer and no irrigation. And if they're gonna try and lay down sod, most likely they would need to irrigate that, and I would rather not see that sort of pathway going in,
Okay.
if possible.
I'm sure that, within the 100-foot buffer zone, because part of the path actually extends outside of it, that, a condition that it not be sod, we would, accept, and we just have to seed it, and it may, I don't think the idea is for it to be, highly manicured. It's really just to get down to the creek.
And so, and no fertilizer either?
Yeah, if that's a condition, absolutely. Best management practices, but,
Yeah.
Which would allow for some fertilizer use, but if you were going to restrict it, I don't think that that's something for the overall application that we're gonna, that I would see my clients necessarily, wanting to argue about.
Yeah, 'cause again, it was in the previous order, I noticed, so.
That's fine.
Yeah, didn't we discuss them using actually a watering can when this came up last time?
I don't remember.
Okay, but it sort of rings a bell.
Yeah, it didn't pass unanimously.
No, it didn't.
So.
No.
So it's in lawn already, is that correct? It's
No, it's
basically-
more like the edge of the lawn. There's a lawn as part of the developed site. There's some grass and there's some plantings that exist along there, which would be cleared to make way for this. There's a little retaining wall at the very start of it, which I think may be actually just outside of the jurisdiction of the commission. The idea is to, obviously keep it somewhat buffered and separate to the extent possible from the underlying property, as it's serving the property in the back.
Any other questions? Questions from the public? Okay, seeing not, would you like to close?
Yes, please.
Is there a motion to close?
Motion to close?
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to 102 Wallwinnet Road Nominee Trust at 102 Wallwinnet Road.
Brian Madden from LEC Environmental.
And Katrine Higgins from Wilkinson Ecological Design.
And just getting the plans out, but at the last meeting, there was some concerns about the boardwalk going over the wetland as part of the overall wetland restoration project. The boardwalk has since been eliminated. and the grass strip is being maintained along southerly property boundary south of the wetland restoration area. And the land management plan and the restoration plan were updated accordingly, and I think that's the primary concern raised at the last meeting. If there are any questions?
Any questions from the board?
No.
I appreciate you revising the
Thank you.
plan. Any questions from the public? Okay, seeing as there's no questions, would you like to close?
Please.
Do I have a
Move to
motion?
close.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that passes
Thank you very
unanimously, thank you. Okay, moving on to Nantucket Property Trust, 13 Hollowell Lane.
Good evening, Madam Chairman and members of the Commission. For the record, my name is Lee Wisher from Woods Hole Group. I'm here with Art Gasparo.
Would you mind speaking louder into the microphone? And the reason why I ask is because I had to look at a recording and
Absolutely.
it's terrible.
You need to get a taller microphone.
I know, we really do.
We've
We really
requested
do.
that.
You can pick it up.
I'm just,
But no, it's,
People sit down.
thank you so much.
can bring a chair over for the
I mean, I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I
'cause
think we just need a standing mic at
We
some
need a
point from
standing
the
mic.
town.
All right.
And sorry to interrupt you,
No,
it
that's
just,
perfectly
Put chairs there before.
Yeah.
it was
just-
like watching a pantomime when I was trying to
Right.
catch up last time.
levity. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
go on.
You're gonna get real casual, you can sit down and talk right
I think if that'll help. If you have a question, Art, I'll get up.
Come on, it's nice. Everybody around the table.
Okay.
All right, here we go. So, what I hope we have here is a pretty straightforward repair project, maintenance. We're asking to repair 125 feet of existing bulkhead and putting steel sheeting in front of it with a wood cap over it. We're asking to go in front because of the fact that there are dead men that are back into the coastal bank, and if we were to drive the sheeting behind that, we would have to pull out the cables and dead man, and it would have disturbance to the coastal bank. We're also asking to repair one of the existing groins. The other groin on the property was repaired some years ago under another filing. And so we're asking you to do pretty much the same thing, to repair the deteriorated piles. There's about 6 to 8 of those. And also to repair any of the whalers that have deteriorated, or as they pull the piles out, find deterioration. We're asking,
Hold on one second.
yeah,
Yeah, can we stop talking? Thank you. Sorry.
that's okay. I'm doomed tonight.
Not at all.
So anyway, we propose to access the site for the repair from Hollowell Lane and put a sand ramp over the coastal bank, accessing the beach to do the repair of the groin first, and then retreating back, and then doing the repair of the bulkhead. We propose to make the ramp out of beach-compatible sand, and we would leave the sand on the beach as above mean high water as beach nourishment. And then any damage to the coastal bank would be repaired and planted as required. Any questions?
So will you be raising the height of the groins at all?
No, it would be repaired in kind.
Yep.
And nor would it be extended.
This is probably old enough structures that they did not have a mitigation component when the project was installed.
Yeah.
But with the groins, I'm wondering if it makes sense to mitigate the area between the groins, because the sand gets just trapped sort of in there anyway. But I think these kind of repair jobs are opportunities for us on these older structures to add a mitigation component to it, as we
Yes.
would on a new project.
Well, we're proposing to leave the sand from the ramp, which would be, I haven't calculated what the estimate is because of the fact it kind of depends on what the conditions are. But if the commission wanted to have us put X number of yards down as part of this project, that's would be perfectly fine.
Yeah, I think that we would probably want that at this point. Do you know what the average erosion rate or contribution would be in this area?
I do not.
I don't, if I may, Art Gasparo, I don't believe that there's really much erosion here because it's been armored, you know, that it's already protected. So what I have noticed working on several of these properties all in a row here is that seasonally you see fluctuation in the beach. There's some small bit of erosion that happens occasionally from the most severe storms above the bulkhead due to the height, but I don't think that there's an actual ability to calculate an annualized rate of erosion due to the coastal armoring that exists. But what I would say is that you know, because of the groins, there's typically you know, a fairly high beach seasonally while it changes. I don't know that an actual annual nourishment would not result in an overfilling, you know, of this area.
So how about if we proposed that you came back to us once or twice a year with a mean high tide measurement to see if that fluctuated, and that would give us some indication of whether it was affecting the beach or not, and that way we could decide going forward whether we needed more mitigation. Because I absolutely take your point, Art, about how it's hard to quantify. And so that just occurred to me that would be one way to see.
Well, if that were to be done, we would need to have the data collected such that we take the seasonality out of it because of the fact
Right.
that, as Art said, we've been working on this, I don't know, when did we start with Dr. J's? About 15 years ago,
Yeah.
10 years ago. And in that period of time, there really hasn't, you know, the back beach has remained fairly stable and high, although in the wintertime it drops down,
Right.
as it does
Right.
on most beaches on Nantucket. And in the summertime it builds back up. So I would just caution the commission to take into seasonality into account so that we don't artificially end up with some kind of you know, a seasonal effect in there. You go, oh, well, you've got erosion going on here when it's really just a seasonal effect.
I totally take your point, and so I was wondering when this mean high water elevation that's on the map that you gave us, when that was measured, for instance.
I could get you the exact date for the next hearing, but I don't recall. It's recent, you know, in
Yeah.
preparation for this filing, so it was between, you know, sometime in the spring. And what I would like to point out is that on the plan is also shown the mean high water line per LCC, meaning Land Court Case 12022K. And I could also get you the date on that, but that might go back to the 30s or the 50s, you know, quite a ways back, which I think establishes this area, the stability of this area. When that high water line from an old Land Court plan matches a 2019 survey, you know, I think that you have a lot of data there to show
Sure.
that, and, you know, much of it I think is as a result of the groins.
But again, our concern typically is not just maintaining the beach in front of these structures, or in this case within, but you know, the neighboring beaches as well. That's what our mitigation is really for, is to protect downdrift beaches. But again, these groins are, the problem with them is they prevent sand from going downdrift. That's their whole, that's what they do. They capture the sand behind them.
I mean, maybe now, because I can kind of see both sides of this, that if they put mitigation sand in there, it's really just going to be kind of trapped between their own groins. But to be monitoring in the future and scour or different effects of these groins on the surrounding beaches to see if it truly is starving some sediment, because you guys did mention in your application that you've lost sand, you know, from behind the bulkhead because it's wearing out. So clearly during storms, had there not been a bulkhead, there would be some sediment contributed to the system.
And I think Ernie's point about this, I was just looking through the documents you submitted. There's one from 1955 that I think is maybe the initial approval for this. So when we have an opportunity to look again at something that has been there a long time, and we have the data, as Art was saying, I think that it's very useful to look at that data and see if mitigation is something that we can add to the picture, because obviously in 1955, that wasn't even thought of. So I think since we have the data, I would like to see that used to, I'm not quite sure how we would do this, but that we would in some way be able to, or you would be able to show that the neighboring beaches are not being damaged by this, but nor do we want to have, you know, a bunch of sand dumped in the middle of this, which isn't gonna do anybody any good.
I think that one of the points is to look at the context of the setting of this property. And if you look at the GIS map that was provided, we're in the middle of a groin field. So this property, and there's armoring that exists on both, going in both directions, as well as groins in both directions. So I don't know that we necessarily would have a situation of, end scour that could really occur at this spot. And again, I'm not at all trying to be argumentative, but to explain why I think that this particular property, I don't know where, I'm certainly we will provide, pre and post construction surveys, post-construction reports, including, the materials installed, a plan, the volume of sand that was used, and then perhaps if you want, an annual, during the life of the order, something like that, provide an annual survey over those few years. I think that would be reasonable.
Well, I think that would, I may be presumptuous, but I think that would address your concerns that you raised if we had an annual survey that was required, and leaving the sand from the beach, and that could be plussed up for a initial, quote, nourishment, and then we could see how the project performs.
Yeah, because I think going forward, as the other groins, I assume, come up for renewal, we would want to address the larger picture. But as you say, it's rather hard to focus just on your small component of what has been allowed on the beach. So we were, I think, looking to you for some advice on this at the same time as discussing it, since it's your profession.
Well, it is, and groins are problematic because of the fact that, as Art pointed out, that their purpose is to trap sand and to stabilize the
Right.
beach behind them. So it's not like it's the end groin on either the updrift or downdrift. It's smack in the middle, which makes it more difficult to try and assess what potential impacts are. So
I have a question about the construction logistics. When you are going in to replace or repair the timber pilings, is there going to be a siltation curtain or boom of any sort to make sure none of that debris is getting into the water there?
typically, when we take well, you can jump in, but typically we vibrate the piles out, and so they come out in whole, and if they don't, then we would excavate down the sand and then cut them off below grade. So there's no debris that's going to be generated per se, and I'll let Art address that.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I would add that having monitored the repairs of the other groins here, the vibratory head is used on the edge of an excavator for both directions. To take it out, it's vibrated out, and then it's vibrated back in. It's not necessarily hammered. It's and so we're not actually excavating to install them. So there's really not a lot of just to echo Lee's disturbance that's happening, or sedimentation, and we're certainly not working in a tidal environment, in a wet environment, working on a dry beach, I guess is what I would say.
And would you say that most times you can pull those pilings out? I know you said you might have to cut some out under below grade.
Only if they snap off.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
most
the
times
rotted
it's-
ones might snap, but I mean, I remember back years ago being surprised how well the vibratory head in the sandy soils. I mean, I don't want to say butter, but they go right in.
David, what were you saying?
Well, this is the perfect scenario for putting that stuff in. It's the
For
easy.
using the vibratory technique.
Any other questions from the commission? Questions from the public? Okay.
Before you close, I can clarify a
Yeah, they
question.
don't have a
That
file
Art,
number, so.
no, we don't, that's true. That land court plan that Art referenced, was able to bring it up here, it is from 1933. So that water line that he shows, that 12022K plan was from, the land court plan was signed off on October 5th, 1933. So somewhere, that water line was probably surveyed in 32, 33, depending on how long it was taken to track through land court then. So, but it's about that old.
If I may, we do have a file number, but we were waiting on Natural Heritage's response, so we would request a
Okay.
continuance for 2 weeks.
Okay, so continue until August 28th? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to Salon Elves LLC at 3 Wires Way, Lot A.
I would actually say if you want, and if it's okay with the applicant, we can probably hear both of these at once. It's the same record plan, essentially.
Okay,
So,
so that'll be Salon Elves LLC, 3 Wires Way, Lot A and Lot B.
in a sense, in talking about it twice.
Yeah. David Haynes for the applicant. There are two separate notices of intent, but they are very closely related. There is a little bit difference in one, on lot B. Okay, there's an existing house on the lot. The lot was subdivided into 2 lots, and now, that house is to be removed, and then it's to be replaced with 2 houses, and, a swimming pool, 2 swimming pools, but outside of the those will be all outside of the buffer zone. The garage on lot A will be outside of the buffer zone. The house on lot A will be in, and a portion of the house, most of the house on lot B will be also in. And the construction of a driveway, and landscaping. The wetland boundary was approved in a request for via a determination of applicability back in the spring of 18, and it is still valid. There's a shrub swamp leading off to a shallow fresh marsh farther away. Right along the wetland boundary, it's been existing lawn, but it has been encroached on by Japanese knotweed, and it's a pretty thick community of that there. So the project on lot A, in the buffer zone, is the construction of the house and some landscaping. This site has a very high water table, or a high water table, and it has been measured to be about 14 feet. Both lots will be filled with about 2 feet of fill to bring it up to match the grades just below the grades of the house, the lots that surround it, to try to maximize any kind of separation to the water table. However, we are proposing to put a crawl space with a monoslab on the site, that those footings will probably be just inside the seasonal high water table. There is a pretty good fluctuation of the water table here, and we feel that we can probably do it in the fall when the water table is lower and we do not have to de-water. We are asking for a waiver for a structure within 2 feet of the water table. However, even though we're talking about a crawl space, if we were to go in with regular frost walls and a slab construction, we would still be within that 2 feet of the water table. So we feel like and by filling it, we've reduced the amount of impact, or reduced the separation to the water table. Lot B, the house construction is the same consideration because of the height of the elevation of the land. This area is underlain by actually marine clay, from here all the way over to Woodbury Lane. Woodbury Lane had 35 feet of marine clay, which was fascinating as a geologist anyway. And with seashells in it. And it's 35, 40 feet above sea level, and sea level was never that high, or hasn't been that high in the Sound. And so what it is, basically when the ice came forward, it bulldozed Nantucket Sound and bulldozed the clay up into this landfill up in here.
And it's 35 feet thick.
Hmm?
It's 35 feet thick.
Yeah, it's 35 feet thick, and with seashells, and I'm going, how are the seashells up here, there's no glaciers across it. But anyway, so it is a perched water table. They did a test, an excavation and put in basically a monitor well. They've been monitoring it since last November, the elevation of the water, but they also found, they went down through about 2 feet of fill, what they thought was fill material, and then they came into clay. So it's all, there's clay underneath the wetland, there's clay underneath this side. So we are asking for the waiver for the 2-foot separation to the water table. We will de-water into a frac tank with a silt bag in it and discharge it and flow out over the ground. There will be a silt fence put in around it, and monitor anything so that we will not have, if we start getting dirty water coming out, we'll shut it down and make corrective action. Lot B, also the driveway coming in, Lot B does contain the invasive species, the Japanese knotweed. What we're proposing to do there is to go in with a invasive removal program of actually spraying the knotweed with rodeo at the manufacturer's recommended rate during non-wind conditions when no rain is predicted. And that's, okay, there's 2 different scenarios. One is when, if they want to attack this before this, the time of the year, non-growing season, to go in and cut down all the Japanese knotweed and take that material to the dump and dispose of it in the digester. The following year, we come in and anything that we sprouts to treat that with rodeo as a foliar treatment, and then do that for the first year and try to kill everything that's there. Then come in and take out a foot of the topsoil and dispose of that in the digester. The roots and the plant parts in there, and then backfill that with clean fill, and then any resprouting, we would treat that again, and then we would replant this area all the way out to, we put a split rail fence along the edge of the driveway, and then a portion of there is a landscape plan. Was that in the file done by Shampoo?
No, I don't believe so.
Yeah,
It's not there.
it was not.
Wasn't in there?
It's not.
Sorry about that. Anyway, basically, we're gonna replant the 25-foot vegetated buffer with vegetation, including Joe Pye weed, inkberry, swamp azalea, groundsel tree, myrtle, sweet gale, Virginia rose, Irish blueberry, and arrowwood, and then seed with a conservation seed mix. And then there's a small area of a meadow outside of that will be seeded with a fescue mix. Then there'll be a split rail fence put in there, and the driveway will run across through that area to Lot B. This lot, this area is already mowed, and so there is no vegetated buffer. We are asking for a waiver because we're disturbing slightly more than 50% of the area between 50 and 25. And we are asking for a waiver from that, saying that the overall project will be a net benefit and improvement by the reestablishment of a vegetated buffer and the eradication of the Japanese knotweed. That's basically both projects in a nutshell. We will monitor it for 3 growing seasons to make sure the eradication has taken effect and also the vegetated buffer has become reestablished.
So a couple of questions. The knotweed is all out, it's a buffer zone project, not,
Right.
and what is it, just too big of a stand to do clip and drip?
Well, the spraying is much more effective because you have much more surface area if you spray the leaves, and I've been told that was, because I brought that one up first, because that's always, but in talking to Ben Shampoo, he felt it was more effective to spray it. We could do a clip and drip if that's what the commission requires. But
Well, if you're gonna spray, I think the way I would do it is, it's probably too late to treat it this fall.
Yeah.
So I would just let it die, cause it'll all top die, and then just mow it down. You don't have, it doesn't need to go to the dump in that case. Just mow it, chip it, leave it on the ground, because it's not gonna re-sprout once the stems are dead. And then I think what I would do is I would then just let it come up in the spring, and once it leaves out, I think I would treat it with, what is it, Aquamaster, that Garlon product, the triclopyr in the spring. And, you know, there's a wetland approved version of that. And, you know, kind of give it the one punch. Then the two punch, I think I would just mow it like your lawn all summer and just keep mowing it down, mowing it down, mowing it down. And then in August or so, let it grow up and get enough leaf on it so that you can come back and treat it with a spray. So, you know, try to weaken it in the spring and then mow it, keep it mowed down, and by then, in the fall, you might just be able to walk around and just hit individual plants by then.
have you heard good things about the triclopyr? I've heard, I was originally, I had been pushing for that, and then I've heard some people say it doesn't work, and I mean, I never touch this stuff anyway. But
What's it called again?
triclopyr, it's
Triclopyr.
brush, the ingredient in brush pecan.
And Garlon, it's the trichloral version of 2,4-D. It's 2,4,5-T, I think is what it is.
I mean, anything that's effective, I'd like to run goats, because, I mean, they're doing a good job on both.
Well, they'll eat it, yeah, but it's not gonna eliminate it, yeah. And then the other thing is, you cannot dig up the below ground stuff and take it to the dump. They do not want the sand in the digester, because it screws up the bearings and their internal. So when we do projects, we have to knock all the dirt off the roots
And
before
what
we.
do you do with the dirt?
It has to stay in
You
place.
just leave it on the site. So it's, I mean,
You'll have to
I think
treat
it's
it.
better just to keep, you know, to kill it from the top instead of digging it all up if possible, you know.
I mean, I've heard both sides. I've heard people say that digging it out down to as deep as you can go to get as much of it, but treat it first, so you try to kill the roots as
Mhm.
much as possible, and then remove a lot of the root stock.
The problem is then you're passing that soil to be somebody else's
No.
problem, so kinda needs to stay on site.
No, I know we don't want to do
Yeah.
a certain place.
And with knotweed, it's like 2 feet deep even. It's way down there. That stuff's
Yeah,
deep, and
It'll
it's,
go under roads and,
I've got a patch of the mowing for 35 feet.
yeah, mowing itself will not take care of it ever, but if you can help kind of reduce its below ground reserves before you treat it, it may make the treatments, somewhat more effective, but,
Okay. I'm happy to modify our protocol on that. And I mean, those are good suggestions. I know that's a very effective way of, by keeping mowing it and starving it, carbohydrate-wise.
and the good thing about spray is you can use a much lower concentration. I mean, clip and drip, we usually recommend, a 2-to-1 dilution, but spray, I think you're down to a couple percent, maybe 3 or 4%. So that's,
I mean, having more surface area, the leaves, you get much more effective.
and you'd use Sidekick as an adjuvant.
I don't know.
I think that's probably recommended for spray, so it'll better penetrate the leaf. And it's another organic product that decomposes.
That's the most common additive we see.
Yeah,
And you use that with the triclopyr or with the
I think both.
Yeah.
Both of them.
Yeah, basically it helps it just to get through the, into the leaf, through the cuticle, you know, that waxy layer, it
Yeah.
helps
I
penetrate the
think
wax.
Sidekick is primarily like a citric acid based,
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a citrus product.
so it just gets on and breaks
Is that
down
what
the.
people are using just by itself, is it, to try, is it natural? No.
it
no,
doesn't work.
cause it's
Some
not,
people-
it's not poisonous.
It really just breaks down the cuticle on the leaf enough for the rest of the chemicals to get into the leaf without that coming off.
And they don't really get the limonene in this product comes from the timber industry, not from the citrus industry, which is better because it's actually two isomers, and the one from the timber industry breaks down faster in the environment than the one from the citrus. So it's better to use the one that they use. I mean, they're being responsible by using the timber product. Probably more of it around too.
So when I looked at this, the first thing I thought was, oh, that 50% rule. And I appreciate that you're trying to restore some of the buffer and do some invasive work, but I cannot see justifying this level of development with groundwater issues and a wetland right there with just that little buffer restoration.
Right now, there's nothing, if we pull the driveway out, we could actually, if we pulled the driveway out and had the 50%, they wouldn't even have to do the they wanna do the eradication, and they wanna plant the
Yeah.
vegetative buffer, but I mean, if we weren't asking for a waiver, we wouldn't have to do it at all. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just barely over 50%, it's over 50%.
Yeah, that's just kind of where I stand with this one.
I am also concerned about that specific issue. I'm trying to wrap my head around the long-term net benefit. I understand the eradication of the knotweed if it's successful, and the planting plan, which we unfortunately didn't get to see beforehand, but I understand that. But even with that work, doing the planting and doing the eradication, you're going to have a significant amount of disturbance within the 25-foot buffer doing all that work. Then you're going to have the area between the 25 and the 50-foot buffer more than 50% altered. It just, to me, it seems, if anything, we're getting to an equilibrium or a net loss, not a net benefit, in my opinion.
But currently, it's existing, I mean, except for the knotweed, this area right here is all existing lawn, mowed lawn, right up to the edge, you know. And we're planting a shrub buffer and a meadow and putting a fence up, a split rail fence to allow wildlife to pass through, but
Yeah, I just don't think the area of the proposed mitigation planting is sufficient enough to justify the area of land being turned into driveway.
I can come back with numbers, give you the numbers. I mean, it is, I mean, it's not a structure, it's a gravel driveway. And it is, I mean, you like a 25-foot vegetative barrier, and I'm trying to give you that. And which does not exist now, except for the invasive species. I think it's an overall net improvement, net benefit.
It would be good to, I don't want to be argumentative, but it'd be good to see the numbers here.
We can give you the numbers, and I can revise the vegetative management plan.
Yeah, show us.
Any other questions from the commission?
Well, I take Seth's point, but, you know, a lot of the ground coverage is outside the 100-foot, which, I mean, it's a staggering amount of development, looking at the lot as a whole. And I'm wondering how that's going to affect, you know, the wetland going forward, but some of it's outside our purview anyway.
But they have,
So I appreciate the fact that you're trying to mitigate from your point of view. I don't know, what would you like to see, Seth, for more mitigation, or?
Yeah, I think if some mitigation might be able to be extended past the 25-foot buffer. I know that's where the driveway is proposed, but
We are, I mean, this is the 25-foot line. We are doing a little bit of
Okay.
into that area. I'll see what we can do to expand that,
Sure, yeah. Thank you.
and I'll give you the numbers. And I'll give you the landscape plan.
Thank you. Any questions from the public on this one?
I have just a comment, which is.
Please come up
Please
and
come
state
up.
your name and speak into the
I also
microphone.
see the landscaping plan. My name is Michael Gimo, 54 Westchester Street. So I back up to this property.
Yeah, I'm sorry, this is just something I printed out. It should be on a bigger plan. I thought it was submitted. And this, where are you?
I'm just back here.
Back here, it's over here, the wetland, here's Weir's Way, Wires Way, and here the wetlands down this way. This is their lawn out here, and then there's an area of Japanese knotweed. This portion of the lawn is going to be replanted with.
So where's that
Yeah,
on
so
this-
which
on this
spot are
plan?
you?
Yeah.
It's like that, this area right here,
I-
over here.
Yeah, exactly.
So this area is going to be replanted with shrubs and a meadow area.
Okay, and I mean, there's currently vegetation in that area too. Is that all gonna be cleared out?
Yes, it looks like it would be.
So I mean, that,
And
you
then,
know,
there was a revision being discussed about putting a fence here or something.
yeah, there was,
And that just came.
that would be helpful. You know, I don't have any strong objections to this, but I do know that it drains this way.
Mhm.
I'm a little
And-
concerned about the fill. I have talked to the developer and he assured me that it was just gonna meet the grade.
Right, and
Not be an issue.
it actually, these two lots are kind of a bowl, and so we're bringing it up, so we're not gonna be any higher than the abutting property. So it's gonna be a little bit higher on this property, but it's not gonna create a dam that prevents it from coming over onto yours. I mean, it's not gonna cause you flooding.
So is that something you'd be willing to monitor for us in big rain events, that it's truly not causing extra flooding?
Yeah.
Okay.
And which corner of the property is that in
It's
terms of
the
Northwest?
north.
the northeast, northwest?
Yeah, north.
Yeah.
I do have a question about the foundations for these proposed houses as well. I see that you've requested the mono slab with the crawl space,
Mm-hmm.
and I appreciate looking at a shallow foundation. But since I don't work in this industry, is there anything that's even shallower than that? Can you get rid of a crawl space or do something to not meet, so that you would be able to meet the 2-foot separation with a different design?
The way I understand it, we'd still have to, if we did a slab, we'd still have to put in frost walls that go down the same. Frost wall has to go down below the frost, which is 3 to 4 feet, and there's a footing up below that, so
Okay.
we still get the same depth in there.
I guess my other question here would be, what is going to be planted in there? Is there gonna be landscaping in that area?
I can-
And I see it on the plan cuts off
Right.
there.
Yeah, I mean, this landscaping plan was
effect January 1st, 1978.
No, it wasn't.
Well, but my point being, in terms of establishing precedent, you know, that I'm feeling very wary about this.
Well, I think
So-
we need the dates then, because, I mean, it's, I mean, they use 78 as a general date. They don't say August 31st, 1978, or whatever, you know. But I don't know when that law was enacted.
But the
Correction.
bottom line is they could move the house back. And so I take your point about, you know, that cost isn't an issue with us. And so I have my reservations, I'm afraid, about this approach.
Yeah,
So,
Well,
although,
wait a second.
I can
We have a
clarify.
commissioner trying to finish
I can
speaking.
clarify something.
that's all right.
I wanted to add something. No, it's very specific in both the state regulations and the town regulations. In the state regulations, it's August 1st, and it's a notice of intent filed by that point or construction to have begun prior to that date. In both cases, that's met for this instance.
thank you.
For the local bylaw, it's August. It's not, there's not a day that's identified, just the month of August. To be more specific, the state says that the commission shall permit a coastal engineering structure to protect the pre-78.
Yes, if there's no alternative, I don't mean to interrupt. So, in fact, moving it is definitely an alternative. And when we're trying to protect the beach and the environment, I don't feel that I want to think of this as being a given, that we permit a coastal engineering structure, because we're having these issues about coastal engineering structures to begin with. So,
I see that point of the coastal engineering structure in general, but my problem actually does hinge on there still being coastal dune, because there was a project that we just denied because there was coastal dune that was going to interact with a coastal engineering structure. And it is pretty clear in our laws that that's not to be permitted.
I'm curious if, first of all, if you said that dune had been stable for a pretty good length of time, and then we had 1 year where it got eroded, I wonder if that year could just be an anomaly, and maybe they're jumping the gun a little bit here. And I know nobody wants their bank to go, but I'm also kind of wondering if that dune is there because of the sand drift fence, or was there always a dune there and then they just put the sand drift fence in to protect that dune?
Want to give some clarification?
So my name is Ira Paston.
actually, would you
Yeah,
talk into the
we need-
microphone,
Yeah,
please?
come on.
Yeah.
So we moved here in the 70s, built a house. When we built the house, there was a bank, there was no dune. Then, over the years, depending on the winter, we got a bigger and bigger dune. And then about 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it started to disappear. And by the year before last, it was gone, totally gone. And the bay started to be eaten away by the waves. Every year, we put in a snow fencing in an attempt to trap sand, is commonly done. Some years it works and some years it did not work. So this past year it has worked, and there is a few feet buildup. But it's not a permanent dune, there's no grass growing in it. It's really sand that was trapped by the snow fence. If you look further down the beach with the snow fence, no sand. So I would not have called it a dune. I'm not a coastal engineer. I actually do cancer research. So it's, to me, it's a transient buildup of sand. I wouldn't have called it a permanent, it's not a permanent dune. So it's come and gone. But the bank is eroding away because the water is coming up higher. And we've lost, at the top, maybe over the years, 10 feet. Last winter, we lost 3 feet because we have to adjust our stairways. So it is the glacial till, the bank that we're concerned about.
Thank you. So are you proposing mitigation sand? Or-
The mitigation discussed is in essence maintaining the volume of the dune. It's at the code.
Yeah, it says a 6-inch minimum of cover.
But if,
That would be back on the envelopes.
but what would be the,
The significant sediment supply, the immediate sediment supply is being acted upon with, in the dunes.
so how many cubic yards?
We estimate there's probably about 200 cubic yards there now. So if that's maintained at 200 cubic yards, that would keep up with the existing conditions and availability of material
But-
to nourish adjacent beaches.
So let me be more specific. So this gentleman has said that he lost 3 feet. So what was that in actual cubic yards per linear foot, his loss last year?
So I think I said I lost 3 feet from the top.
Yeah.
Right,
Returning it.
right,
So, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And you,
So you
asked in-
you would extrapolate that you lost at least 3 feet from the bottom if you lost 3 feet from the top.
We didn't lose any, so that was from the, I'm speaking about things I don't fully understand. But basically what happens, the waves come in, they eat out the bottom, and then the top collapses over a few years, so it's just gradually goes back.
So it wouldn't be clearly a 3 foot at the, a 3 foot
All the way up.
column
Yeah.
that was gone.
Well,
Because
we
of
don't
a lot
worry
of
about
material.
single-year events anyway. We want a
Yeah.
long-term average. I mean, one year you might lose 10 feet, but then every other year you lose a half a foot. So that means you lose maybe 2 foot a year. So we can't go by worst year or best year as far as what's lost. We want an average year.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna read performance standard number 6 under our bylaw for coastal dunes. Any activity allowed on a coastal dune or within 100 feet of a dune shall be restricted to such activity that is determined by the commission not to have any adverse effect on the dune by altering the ability of wind or waves to remove sand from or deposit sand on the dune, by disturbing vegetative cover in a manner sufficient to destabilize the dune, by causing any modification of the dune form and slope which would increase the potential for erosion, storm, or flood damage, or by interfering with landward or lateral movement of the dune, or by causing the rate of sand removal to increase through man-made means or structures. So I'm worried that this would interfere with landward movement of a dune.
So
Yes, but
if I was
Ashley-
you, here's what I would do. I would take that fence out, let the dune go away, and then come back in with your project. I mean, I hate to say that, but if it is the fence that's building the dune, then quit putting the fence there and it's an artificial dune. If the dune stays, then you're still screwed. But if the dune goes away, then you can come in and say you don't have a dune
Okay.
anymore.
Throwing
and
it
then
out
So,
you're-
Madam Chairman, could I interrupt? All right, I'd like to take this gentleman at his word. When we had 99 Baxter Road, we had a real dune at the base of the cliff, which was about 15 feet high, undulated, had grass, all of which we lost. And then we had a second set of steps going down to the beach. I take you at your word that it's an artificial dune. And from my point of view, I don't see why we should say you have to take the fence out for several years, rather than accept that it's not a real coastal dune in the way that we define one,
Well, I would
and then
agree with
try
you.
and calculate how much sand we need for mitigation going forward. So that would be,
That's what I was.
right, right. And so,
Okay, we're back on track.
Yeah,
you know, it just sounds, sorry? I mean, it,
So are you, Ernie?
No, I totally
indicating
agree.
to
I
take
thought
the
Ashley
sand
was
away?
gonna,
no, I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
I do, I
I
am
know what you're
reading
thinking.
our bylaw as it stands. There's nothing that says if the dune is artificial, we can't put it in. I mean, we are mitigating around this island with so much sand. Are we gonna say every dune that's created through mitigation sand is in fact an artificial dune? No, we're not, you know? So for me, coastal dune on the plan is coastal dune per our regs, which does make it difficult to put a coastal engineering structure here. I mean, I'm one person on the board, but that is how I read our bylaw, 100%.
I'm not disputing your reading of the bylaw. I guess,
Or my interpretation of how it would apply here.
well, I guess I really don't know the actual definition of what a dune is. It doesn't look like a dune to me. It looks like a continuation of the beach. So please, perhaps I should be asking for a clarification here.
It's not vegetated, is it? I mean, if there's no vegetation on it, dunes usually are covered with
Right.
grass. I mean, they do move around
Exactly.
below, but, it sounds like an accumulation of sand behind a sand drift fence. to
Right.
me.
Not a dune.
And I
Right.
mean, over time, it may form a dune field if it would persist over time and actually start to build up and, you know, and get vegetated, then perhaps it would become a dune, but I don't know if what we've got there would be really a dune. If you dump sand on the beach, do you have it, I mean, you know, mitigation sand, does that make it a dune field then? And then it's in front of our structures, but I don't know, I think gets kinda confusing.
I mean, dunes are transient in essence in some ways.
Well, they can be, yeah, I mean, they're not, I mean, but what we, again, like at Sankaty, those were dunes, and there's still dunes there that are
Right.
vegetated sand at the bottom of the bank. And, those I think you would recognize as a dune. You'd look at that and go, oh, that's a dune, not a pile of sand that's built up behind a fence.
Right.
Well, either way, the current plan that's in front of us has coastal dune labeled on it,
Well,
so.
if this is gonna be an issue, I'd take the fence out myself. I mean, that's what I would do.
That's what I wanted to clarify. But that we would still be proposing the envelopes.
No, once the
on
dune
back.
is
No,
gone.
he's saying you'd take the fence out, let the dune disappear, and then there's no issue with coming in and requesting the,
It's crazy, and I hate to say it, but it seems like we're,
because the dune's gonna prevent you from requesting this structure.
Or you could change your application and remove coastal dune. You know, remove the word dune from it. I mean, Ashley, I'm sorry, my dear. It doesn't look like a dune to me, and that's why I'm
Well, given the fact that it was put there
wondering
by
what a
fence,
dune really is, you
So-
know, how to define one.
Read page 25 if you want to read the whole
But
thing. It's
you
too
understand
much
what she's
reading
doing.
for me right now.
yeah.
But either way, I mean, dunes are
Split
gonna be a
hairs.
thing of the past with our mitigation and bank stabilization. They are transient. They've moved my whole life. So I think that we do need to watch out here because again, there's no language for artificial dune. Are we gonna say, oh, people have added mitigation sand, that's an artificial beach. We don't need to protect it anymore. No. You know, it's.
Well, dunes, I mean, when you get a dune at the bottom of a coastal bank, it's because sand is building up faster than it's eroding.
Mhm.
And that has to be over, I mean, for it to get vegetated, it has to take some time. Because beach grass doesn't just magically appear after a year or two, it takes some time.
Right.
So I mean, you know, you know, Sankaty is the case where that thing has gone back and forth, and sometimes that beach builds way out, and when that's the case, then the dune fields develop behind the beach.
Right, but he said the dune blew out 5 years ago. You said there had been a dune?
last year.
Well, I will read, so I've been there forever,
Mhm.
right, since the 70s. When we moved in, there was no sand at the base of the bank. After there a few years, sand started to build up. And after about 10 or 15 years, we actually had a lot of sand, a dune, and we had grass growing on it. And I said, this is heaven, right? What could be better? And then about 10 years ago, it started to wash away, and by 2 or 3 years ago, totally gone. So what we do, what everyone on the beach does, they put up beach fences, snow fencing, and some years the snow fencing catches some sand if there's no winter storm. And if there was no storm last winter, as you all know, the impact was terrible. So last winter, there was no storm, so we have, I don't know, 3 or 4 feet or something of extended beach, partially covering the snow fence still. And that we are calling, quote, a dune. I think that is pretty much what we experience. So it's transient, if we have one big storm, it'll immediately wash away.
Well, coastal dune is not defined in our 2.03 of coastal dunes. It talks about characteristics, and it says vegetated cover contributes to the growth and stability of coastal dunes by providing conditions favorable to sand deposition. And it continues along those lines. There's no vegetation present on these pictures here.
No, both the use of fencing
You
and
know.
planting grasses is a well-accepted
Right.
method of establishing and growing the dune, assisting the dune.
Coastal
to-
dunes.
To have those characteristics. It has nowhere to migrate landward because it's the face of the bank.
Well,
There are
actually-
systems where dunes have migrated up a bank, but I don't see that happening with.
Yeah, I don't think it, for the implication that it meets our definition.
Would you be
But-
okay, Ashley, if they just submitted a new plan and took that out?
I mean, it's on there as
Well,
a
what if they
dune.
submitted a new plan and took it off?
Again, I'm one member, so this might still pass without me being for it. I just am nervous here that a dune might be reestablishing, and if the bank eroded some, they might have a vegetated dune again. But you have to wait for nature a little bit to see if that would happen. I mean, if they blew through the dune and it existed within the last 5 years, and now it's starting to reestablish between this fencing, it might be trying to come back. By permitting this bank stabilization, we wouldn't be allowing that dune the time to come back.
Well, that's inarguable. I mean, that's absolutely true.
So,
And, but, you know, we've been caught before with, you know, the protecting pre-78 structures. And so we could, there's nothing stopping us from denying it and insisting the gentleman move his house back and see whether or not a coastal dune would reestablish. I don't see that there's any habitat is particularly threatened by this. I don't see beach access isn't threatened by it, and you know, it's
I mean, approximate location of coastal dune 8 to 10 feet wide of varying depths along the existing snow fence. I mean, 8 to 10 feet wide, that's significant.
yes, it is.
Well, I don't know, I'm a little troubled with it. I think it sounds artificial to me. It sounds like it's probably the fencing that's doing it at this point, especially if their bank's eroding back. That would suggest the dune is gone to have the bank eroding.
Mhm.
Otherwise,
At some point, it was gone.
the dune would be eroding away. And maybe, but is there any place on the island where we couldn't say, well, there might be a dune here someday? I mean, we can't, that's supposition.
Yeah, but there currently is one on the plan in front of us now. It's not like, hey, it's beach, it might be a dune. I mean, they have on the plan 8 to 10 foot wide coastal dune. So, you guys know where I stand. I'm not gonna keep repeating myself, but. Any other concerns or questions?
Well, they don't. They have coastal bank, but they don't actually say anything about a coastal dune, do they? On the plan?
They actually do.
Yeah, it's up
Where?
at the top of the property line.
And the activities of dune management was brought out in the NOI in section 3.
Do your neighbors also have the core bags on their property, or do they have what we would call the Wilkinson array, which is the solid tubes stacked up on the bank?
They don't have anything yet.
Yeah, but
No,
what's
they
coming
haven't.
in.
What did they permit? Because I don't remember permitting bags in a long time.
Well, no, they're post 78 on either side. I believe
Yeah.
you're looking
Yeah,
at
but the
the.
project that's gonna be worked on this fall, do
For
you
the
know?
Johnson property.
Yeah, it must be Wilkinson.
Mine,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
most of those projects, Ernie, to answer your question, at that stretch have converted over to the more Wilkinson style array. I know the property specifically that kind of started the sandfill envelopes on the shore at 87, 93, and 99 switched from that array. They had kind of that stage conversion as I exposed to convert to that different style of structure.
So right now we have, in other words, there's nothing going along here. There's nothing going
Well, I
along
think
here.
I don't
This
know,
is
I
where
think
they're converting, I assume.
Yeah, we're not getting anyone.
The other option would
there.
be to go put a Wilkinson array in, which is a non-structural alternative. Then,
No, we
then
saw-
you're fine, cause it's not a
And that's
structure.
where he is right now. Right?
First one
They're expensive,
here starts here.
Yeah.
but it's more of a bank, you know, it's more
Oh,
of a
there
bank
is, okay,
reconstruction
Okay.
project. And,
Oh dear.
Then the envelopes would be.
yeah, well,
what you're
the
saying.
trouble is, it's the fence. I mean, the envelopes alone, we never considered a structure. The fence alone, we don't consider a structure. But the combination of the two, we always have considered a structure. So you could take the fence out and put the envelopes in if you wanted to, and then it would not be a structure. Or you could leave the envelopes out and leave the fence in, and then it's not a structure. But to put the two of them
Sure,
together, we've always considered a structure. I think we've had a condition in one of our previous hearings that we declared that to be a structure.
Do most of the
And the same with the
members agree
Wilkinson
that?
array, if it's got the fence in front of it, that would be structural too.
Yes.
Okay. Why don't we ask for continuance? Maybe a change plan.
Would you like to continue for 2 weeks till the 28th of August?
New materials would be due Friday before the meeting.
We do next Friday.
Yeah, we probably need a little bit of time in that.
Do you know what the date is of?
4 weeks. We'll provide more information on the house relocation alternative. That would satisfy the record
Thank you.
since it was asked. The date? Oh, sorry.
Looking.
We're gonna get.
Okay, so the 11th of September. Okay, so this will continue till September 11th.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so we are moving on to Constance and Thomas Sigaran, 25 East Tristram's Avenue.
Let me get the signs out and then I'll get set. Hey, welcome back. Thank you. We missed you. Sure enough. Thank you. Grab some pizza.
I had time, I didn't realize.
For the applicant, excuse me, Art Gasparo, Nantucket Engineering, I am before you tonight with a notice of intent to permit a set of seasonal aluminum beach stairs from the top of an existing permanent timber bulkhead down to the beach. These are the stairs which there has been some discussion recently of at the last meeting and the beginning of your meeting tonight. The stairs were installed by the property owner. He did not realize that an aluminum set of stairs required a permit on a seasonal basis. There was no cutting done to install these stairs. I included photographs. You can see that just rest on the bulkhead and rest on the beach. As soon as I informed him that this was in fact an activity that required review, he told me to proceed to do what needs to be done to make it right. We've done the survey. Shown on plan in red are the set of stairs, and we're seeking an order of conditions to allow those stairs to remain.
Thank you. Are there any
Seems pretty
questions?
formidable.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I agree. Any questions?
You know, we could say that, you know, you can clamber down the sand the same way as the neighbors are being forced to clamber down the sand.
They're not being
We
forced to
permit
do
deep
anything. They can
stairs all
permit
the
their own
time. Come
stairs,
on,
you
guys.
know?
It's a
We
water
do it in
dependent
other
activity.
areas.
They're completely
Yeah.
already
Yeah.
burned out.
Yes.
Yep.
I appreciate that you're making the staircase seasonal, and I don't personally see any issue with it.
We will have to continue for lack of a file number, but if there's
Any questions from the public on this? Okay. So would you like to continue for 2 weeks?
Yes, please.
Okay, so this will continue until August 28th.
As we're continuing that, from that discussion, would you guys like a positive word for that one?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yep.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Moving on to Sarah and Thomas, DC Brown and Little, 9 North Avenue.
I'm gonna have to recuse myself again for this one.
Oh, you didn't finish either.
Sorry.
A lot of copies of this plan.
Once again, for the applicant, Art Gasparo, Nantucket Engineering, before you with a residential redevelopment project notice of intent for work entirely within land subject to coastal storm flowage and within the buffer zone to a bordering vegetated wetland. This property is located in the residential area behind the Nantucket Hotel. The surface elevations are fairly low, as you can see from the plan, around elevation 4. There is an existing garage and an existing single-family home. We're proposing to, they're both located currently within the zoning setbacks, and so I'd like to first address the main house. We're proposing to pick that up, reconfigure it a little bit such that we take the little wart, if you will, off of the south east corner and put an addition off of the southwest corner, which is almost entirely outside of the 50-foot setback. They actually had designed it outside of the 50-foot setback, but when I positioned it to provide a little safety from the zoning setbacks, that's the reason that it's just crossing there. And same with the building, you can see the shift for the red line, just making sure that at the end of the day, from a zoning perspective, that there's not, doesn't remain an encroachment there. The structure would be raised to comply with building codes in the flood zone. We have to add a couple of few extra set of stairs, as you can see on the front of the house and on the side for the deck. The garage would be moved also to get out of the zoning setback, and that would remain a slab on grade. The asphalt driveway that exists almost all the way down to the wetland resource area is considered a structure under your regulations, so we are proposing to remove that asphalt in its entirety and just replace that with lawn grasses. The parking is intended to just be sort of grassroots, if you would. It's a grass driveway that's there, and they weren't proposing something more formal. And we do believe that the overall project, the waivers that are required are justified on the basis of long-term net benefit from the removal of the asphalt driveway, as well as from raising the structure to comply with the flood zone regulations. It will have flood vents to allow the flood waters to flow through there, whereas currently it doesn't. And with that, I'd be happy to try to address questions or concerns that you may have with the application.
Any questions? So the new parking, is that gonna be defined anywhere? Like, I just, worry, I guess, say they're gonna have a party, are they gonna be parking in the wetland if there's no defined area for the cars? Because there's not like a vegetated buffer there.
We will also be, we don't have a file number on this one either, so I'll go back and check with the owner and the architect to see if maybe we come up with something that somehow limits the extent of where that parking may happen.
Yeah, obviously, it's great to remove the driveway, but since we're within the 25, or actually within the 50, I guess, with the new driveway, I share Ashley's concern.
Okay, I'll see what I can come up with.
There's no new driveway, you're just using the existing driveway, and you're getting rid of that parking area.
Right, but in actuality and fairness, they're still, gonna pull in there and park on the lawn, and that's kind of the current use. So I'm not saying that there wouldn't be parking in that area, though it wouldn't be asphalt. So I'll see what I can work on with the applicants. I think it's a fair point, and come back
Yeah.
with
Just cause you don't want,
Yeah, to
like,
control it to not be
gas.
certainly within the 25.
some
foot.
defined limits somehow,
Mhm.
whether it's balls and a rope or a split rail or just something to come back that.
Something
Yeah.
25 foot.
Yeah.
So I can just add it, and when we did our field visit to verify those boundaries, there was some parking on the lawn right adjacent to the asphalt area.
Mhm.
So my guess is it's not uncommon, but it's just based upon the number of vehicles that are present.
Yeah.
Again, I don't think anyone's intentionally trying to do it, it's just probably how it's always been there and it's how they work.
They just need a little definition to keep.
I understand,
guardrails in.
it's a good
Yeah.
point.
Any other questions? Questions from the public? Okay, so would you like to continue this for 2 weeks?
2 weeks, please.
Okay, so this will continue until August 28th.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're moving on to Nantucket Islands Land Bank, Long Pond.
Well, Rachel's coming up. They were kind enough to provide a short, kind of side-by-side video monitoring of the areas they've treated. It's like a minute long, and I'll just put it up on the projector for everyone to see. You can start, because I'm gonna need like a couple minutes just to kind of get that going. I'll try and be as disruptive as possible.
Okay. Hi, I'm Rachel Freeman, and I am here representing the Nantucket Pond Coalition, I suppose, maybe the Nantucket Land Bank.
Both of you, maybe.
Yeah.
Could you
And-
talk into the
Yeah,
microphone?
And-
and maybe just wait until this thing.
It used to be a lot quieter.
God, I feel like being locked in.
Doesn't sound
I
good.
It's gonna be
I really meant it for the disruption.
It used to be a lot quieter. Saints and Eves.
Okay,
Leave it down.
yeah, we don't have to put it up. Okay, I think
Okay.
we're ready for you.
Hi, I'm Rachel Freeman, and I am here on behalf of the Nantucket Land Bank and the Nantucket Pond Coalition for an application to perform Phragmites control on Long Pond. Just to give you a little bit of background about Long Pond, it's about a 79-acre pond, and it's 1.8 miles long. It's one of the largest salt brackish water ponds, and it is considered highly degraded. The Phragmites control that we're proposing is using a 3% glyphosate spray with a sidekick surfactant, and it's a 5-year plan that we're planning to revisit after 3 years. The shoreline that we're looking to treat is approximately 8,350 feet. And this project is sort of the tail end of what has been going on since 2015 at Long Pond, where we initially started a pilot project to treat Phragmites. And since then, we've gradually expanded, and White Goose Cove, and this is really the Pond Coalition who's been doing this with a lot of different homeowners. White Goose Cove was treated, and then north of Massasoit Bridge on the western side was treated, and now we're looking at doing the eastern side, which is primarily owned by the town of Nantucket and the Nantucket Land Bank, and there's a small section that is owned by the Nantucket Conservation Foundation, and I've discussed it with them, and they're more than happy for us to do that. It's a tiny little strip in the middle. We are proposing to do monitoring as well, because I know that's been an ongoing concern. In the past, there's been water monitoring, invertebrate monitoring, and vegetation monitoring that's occurred through different projects. And right now, we're proposing vegetation monitoring. And it would be 5 transects, which is a protocol that was started by Sarah Trainer Boyce and has been done on My Comet and Hummock Pond. And we'd just like to repeat the same protocol in Long Pond to look at the effectiveness of this treatment. Some of the areas where the bulk of the extent of Long Pond is really, really dense Phragmites, but there's a couple areas that I see that are included where it's not as dense because it has been treated before. And I'm thinking sort of closer to Massasoit Bridge, and I'm thinking that maybe that is not as much of a Marsh Master project and maybe a little bit more of a, you know, a backpack and a John boat or something like that, because those areas are, the Phragmites is really intermixed with native plants. So I do think there's opportunity for treating things correctly. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them, and I think that's all I have to say.
I look forward to not seeing Phragmites.
Okay.
So basically the same constraints as far as the weather and all that stuff that we've always had on this project and
Yep.
Okay.
My one question, and it's for kind of after the initial spray.
Mhm.
I know some of the current areas were requiring them to really map where native plants are coming back.
Okay.
To have some sort of data collection like that.
Okay.
To help kind of identify where you'd maybe need to reestablish native plants versus
Mhm.
what comes back, you know, in
Okay.
the following growing seasons.
Okay.
So I don't know if you can.
How
just
have they
get-
been doing that in the past?
That was, what, a month ago that they came in and we're maybe gonna do GIS points with it or GPS
Right.
points with
So
it?
Sarah Boyce
Yeah,
is
Sarah
gonna do
Boyce
that.
has been identifying
She
that.
is in progress to
Okay.
deliver to you all shortly.
So we can use the same protocol that
Okay.
she's proposing.
Okay.
Definitely.
Thank you.
I think it's well worth it.
No questions?
All right.
Questions
So-
from the public?
Since it's not going, I have it up on my laptop, so if everyone kind of gathers around in the middle.
Jeff, can I say a word about this video?
Sure.
Yeah.
So come up and speak into the mic,
Yeah,
please.
hi, I'm Bob Labus from the Pond Coalition, and this is independent of Rachel's submission, but
Can you get a
given
little
that her,
closer to the mic?
notice of intent is the 6th that you've seen, I asked Jeff whether you'd be interested in sort of looking at what's happened, at least in Hummock Pond. So this is a 3-minute and 50-second look at before we did the first year's work and then a month ago. So it's 1 year of the 5 years. And I think sometimes a picture's worth 1,000 words, so here you go.
It's actually the shorter version.
Oh, this is the 1-minute version?
Yes.
Okay.
Everyone see? Kind of.
So it's only worth 100 words.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm fine. Yeah.
So above is what it used to be and below is where it is now. Staggering difference.
Wow,
It's-
yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Look at that.
You
Now,
forget.
It's green down there too, so that's, I mean, is that
Yeah.
frag resprouting or is it other stuff?
It's other stuff primarily,
Excellent.
yeah. Yeah. And this is only about 20% of the amount that we did, actually, this 1-minute video. The 4-minute video goes from the ocean to the Narrows. And what you see are frag stands that are as much as 30 feet out into the water, and 12 feet high, basically gone. So it's reclaimed the shoreline of the water body.
I'm sorry, what? You live down there? Oh, yeah, no, I live right on the pond.
And Rachel's request with the land bank has a wonderful path, walking path for dogs and stuff, and you can't come close to Long Pond. So after this, I think you'll have a shoreline. And then, of course, we'll do some reseeding like we talked about a month ago. And it's really been successful.
All right.
Is that video available online or anything?
I know, can it be made
I
available?
can
I can post the link.
Could you?
Yeah.
That'd
Yeah.
be great if you
Yeah.
could,
I said
Yeah.
visual aids.
I know.
And the 4-minute one is really cool, so usually it goes on and on.
Guys,
No,
one at a
it's-
time,
it's
please.
just stunning. It is absolutely stunning, and it's stunning to see the red-winged blackbirds come back and just not to have, you know, it's like, in the movie, The African Queen, towards the end, and he's slogging through these horrible reeds and all of that, and the leeches are there. And that's really, to try and get down to the edge of the pond was like doing that. I
They're
mean, if you wanted to get a
anacondas
scythe out, you know, so this is, it really permits access to the pond, which is terrific.
Great. Thank you for the video. I think that's definitely helpful.
Jeff will post it somewhere.
Sure,
Put on-
yeah, definitely
Yeah.
we'll
Yeah.
put it on.
The 4-minute one on there,
Okay.
Jeff.
Yeah, really.
You need to send me the
I
link.
don't know, I think we've been through this application so many times, I'm kinda out of questions.
Yeah, me too.
Keep it up.
And if they're gonna do the monitoring that we've,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
now kind of
Yeah.
created.
Yeah, our standard.
He'll be here for years.
All right, so seeing as there's no questions or concerns, would you like to close? Is there a motion to close?
Motion to close?
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Yeah.
That passes unanimously.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Rachel, thanks.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for staying a little longer.
Okay, so we're moving into amended order of conditions, the estate of Lee Rand Byrne, 55 Grove Lane.
Good evening, Mark Ritz from Site Design, representing the applicants at 55 Grove Lane. What you have before you this evening is a request for an amendment to an amendment. This project was originally permitted by Art Gasparo and was further amended, I believe, in around January of this year, early this year. The applicant has come back, the property has changed ownership, and the applicant has come back with basically a revised kind of final house and lot layout configuration. Everything is pretty much where it was in the original approval. They've changed the shape and layout of the house. They've taken the previously approved pool and rotated it 45 degrees in the same spot. The only sort of major change to the plan is the addition of a shed over here, which is outside of the 50-foot wetland buffer zone. There's been a little bit of refinement of grading and landscaping, but it's all, for the most part, within the previously approved limit of work. The driveway and other alterations were previously approved, and that work has, I believe, commenced. Along with the removal of the original house. That's basically it. It's really just kind of a final plan and reconfiguration of what was approved. We don't need any new or additional waivers, and we don't feel that there are any new or additional impacts beyond what was already approved.
So we'll just throw in really quickly, a lot of this we would typically do with the minor mod, but the additional of the shed is really what triggered the amendment process, because it was a new
structure.
New structure is a new part of, new scope of work, essentially.
Any questions? Any questions from the public?
Move to close and issue.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So that closes and issues.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So moving into request for determination, National Grid, 283, 287, and 289 Hummock Pond Road.
Good evening. For the record, I'm Amanda Houle of Ty and Bond here on behalf of Mass Electric Company, doing business as National Grid. Did not bring my easel tonight, so we're gonna
Yeah, we
Watch
have a-
me do my.
I'll help you out.
Yeah.
Work in the chair?
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm good at my Vanna White impression though, so. So I am here for an RDA for the relocation of an existing electric line. This is an older orthophoto. This piece of the road here has been washed out. There was an existing electric line servicing 283, 287, and 289 Hummock Pond Road that followed this roadway, and during some of the winter storms has since basically washed onto the beach, which you can see in figures photos 3 and 4 in the photo. And so the residents out there are now being serviced by temporary lines, and typically a replacement of a utility would be exempt under the Wetlands Protection Act. However, we viewed this as enough of a substantial change given the minor relocation of it away from the water that we wanted to proceed with an RDA to get authorization from the commission. I do know Diane Bouchel from 287 is also here this evening in support of the project. She is a full-time resident. If you want any comment from her, she's also willing to provide a little bit of input. And I also spoke with the consultants from LEC that are also working at 287 for some ancillary work. And they've done actually some extensive borings out in this area and have verified that I had identified this as coastal dune, but it's more of a thin veneer of windborne sediment. And with their borings, they had determined it was more of a glacial deposit. So it wasn't a full dune barrier beach. So this whole system is a barrier beach. However, this area that I had identified as coastal dune, based upon their geologic investigation, is not actually coastal dune as represented in our application. So that being said, we are working within the buffer zone to beach, coastal bank. We're working on the barrier beach, and then within the buffer zone to the coastal flood zone. And so the conduit will be installed through here. There are a few other existing sort of meandering footpaths through this area that the conduit can take advantage of. It'll be trenched. It'll be no wider than 2 feet. Typically, they can get a little smaller depending on the size of the excavator they use. We would typically propose flat matting for the excavator to travel on, but if you needed some sort of low ground pressure equipment, we could also consider that, but that would just avoid any sort of compression of the sediment within that area. And then it would be backfilled in kind. I wouldn't anticipate that this would take more than 2 to 3 days, given it's about 250 linear feet of work for a total of 455 square feet of disturbance. So it's pretty straightforward, and I would like to turn it over to the commission if you have questions.
What
So-
happens to the old cable?
Well, they're leaving it, is what it says.
From what I understand, it's going to be abandoned in place. I had been following up with National Grid, just given its state of exposure, and the caution tape that I saw around it, and I had raised my concerns with National Grid about that and what they were gonna do with it, and it did not seem that it was their intent to excavate it out.
They're gonna remove what's showing.
What's showing, but they're not going
gonna
to,
go-
they're not
they're
gonna
gonna-
remove the remainder of it, so.
So
What's exposed
that's my concern, is that they'll remove what's showing now, and then every storm, it's going to re-expose. And I just think with projects like this, we need an assurance that that will be taken care of.
If, you know, I realize the only extent of work that we proposed under this is the installation of the new conduit, but if, I don't know if that would require any additional consideration or application with you to remove that
We can just
piece.
condition it.
Okay.
Right, so under the RDA, if you issued this out as a -2 for work within the resource area, -2s and -3s, you have the ability to kind of insert a comment into. So I think it would be appropriate to be able to add in a comment that says, all electrical lines existing are to be removed upon exposure, and then you would have that memorialized in that permit.
Can we set like a time limit? Like within 6 weeks of exposure? I just worry that this stuff perpetuates.
Sure, I mean, you could set a time limit. I mean, I think part of it is also a little bit of the question of what constitutes, I know this sounds weird to say, but what constitutes exposure? I mean, is it the end eroded from where it was cut before and there's 2 inches that are sticking out that we need to go and remove that? Or is it some footage? So, I mean, I guess you could say significant exposure or whatever you wanted to put in there, or, I mean, I just think I don't know if you want someone clambering up or down the bank to snip out
Right, an inch.
an inch or 2.
And or do you prefer it's just removed entirely now? I would have to check with them on,
Well,
I don't know if they can pull.
I would have thought removing it entirely
Right.
would,
Oh, yeah.
That's
would
what I
make
would
sense,
like.
right?
Then it's-
Not be able to pull it.
Mhm.
Well, you could put it in that condition, you could put the line, the abandoned line needs to be removed in its entirety or removed upon exposure, and you can have it that way, and then if they choose to pull it. I just don't know the level of work involved with,
No.
like, I don't know if you can just grab the end and pull. My guess is probably not.
Right.
Probably
Yeah,
not.
I
You'd
can't
be-
comment on
you'd
that. I
be
don't know their
excavating
methods.
out.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's sleeved or anything that's there, so I think you would be,
Right.
Which
would-
is probably ill-advised in such a vulnerable,
Yeah.
eroding,
I think you'd
beachfront
do
right there.
better to,
I mean, it's not gonna break off or anything, it's gonna hang out over the beach, it's not gonna fall into the water. I mean, so I'm not as concerned as like, say, a septic tank or something that's gonna fall on the beach and now we have a foundation that's gonna crumble onto the beach. But if it's just a wire hanging out, a foot long, I'm not too worried, but if it's too much longer, more than a couple feet and starting to flop around, then I would have some concerns.
I mean, the photo's showing some pretty
Yeah.
significant exposure at this point.
Well, I know, see, I think that's probably a little too much.
Right, like that needs to be removed.
Yeah, that needs to be removed,
Right.
yeah, and I would say,
And that's certainly the worst of it.
6 foot or more,
Right.
you know, gotta go.
And I think whenever possible, to have it removed is something that we would want to see every time. Because also, not only is it, I mean, it's also it's a hazard there. It's certainly not beautiful in any way, doesn't add to the resource. It certainly takes away from the resource area. Just
I'm sure it adds to public concern too, for visitors.
I mean, it's not
Oh.
hot, right? It's gonna be totally disconnected, there's no
Oh, yeah,
power
yeah.
in there.
But people, it's just, it's
Kids are
kind
gonna
of
be
a block.
climbing up and down the bank.
I was gonna say it would help
Right.
party goers climb up the bank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good
Looks like
thing
people
Dan's
are
not
doing
around
that.
anymore, he'd be up and down that thing.
Yeah,
I mean,
you would.
National Grid would be amenable to whatever your preference is, and I can certainly follow up with them on potential removal options, for this.
but I think you could just put something that says, the abandoned line shall be removed as a minimum of 4 feet is exposed. And then that way it's not little, but 4 feet based upon where it is, it would probably not be interacting with the beach at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And you could simply, especially if it's depowered, you realize I'm not cutting it, taking the section width.
Mm-hmm.
And you still always hold the right as well to issue out enforcement. If
It's hanging there.
a section were there and hanging there, you could simply say, well, we know that's National Grid's line. Here's your enforcement action, National Grid, go remove it. Or face a penalty. So, I don't know. I agree though, it is an island-wide problem of always chasing around utilities and irrigation lines and cable and
Right.
phone and power, and wells, and where they're all going.
Yeah,
Well,
getting bad.
Perhaps you'd like to continue and ask them what their preference would be. I don't know, because it may be much less of a hassle for them if they actually take it all out at once.
Then I think we'd have to start looking at
It would
revegetation,
be a different permit.
plans and, I mean, 'cause if they take it out, they're probably just gonna start grabbing it. I would think either just pulling it up or trenching, either way. they're
They
gonna
would
just-
trench, I would imagine, to remove
Yeah,
it.
from a disturbance standpoint, it seems like it'd be less invasive to just be able to chop whatever
I
off,
think
Sure.
whatever becomes
yeah,
exposed.
yeah.
I would say too that going with like 2 trenches, especially a trench that's gonna be in that proximity to the bank, you would probably wanna
Oh, yeah,
require
part of it's
notice
quite close.
for
Right.
the removal because of the potential impacts to the coastal bank.
And even
Right.
with the notice, it's still such a vulnerable area. I think that their preference is to not disturb it more than it's already being impacted. And I'm sure they'd be open to whatever needs to be removed as it becomes exposed,
Great.
So Jeff,
if that's
what would you
fine with
recommend?
commission.
So I'd recommend a -2 and a -3 for the work, to be done without requiring notice of intent with that condition for the abandonment removal, the abandoned line to be removed when 4 feet is exposed.
Are we adding a timeline for when the cable has to be cut
Before-
once 4 feet gets exposed?
Within 10 days?
Yep.
Probably?
Yeah, I mean,
Might
that
be
way we
hard
ju-
to achieve in the winter.
I don't know if it needs to be 10 days, but that way we know if it hasn't been done, then that's when we can think about enforcement. Or else if we don't have
Within-
the,
Within a
time-
calendar month?
21 days? 21 days is a pretty
Yeah.
normal.
Sure,
number for
yeah.
us.
Especially,
Okay.
I mean, those guys are a big machine. It's hard for them to just send a crew out to do something, you know, if it's not life threatening, so they have to schedule it and all that stuff.
Right.
But that's a reasonable amount of time.
Okay.
It seems like they could just get somebody local to come down there and clip that thing and haul it off, you know, without having to bring a crew out from somewhere or.
No, they do it. National Grid guys here would do it, but it's
Yeah, I would
still.
imagine, a local crew would be able
Yeah.
to do that. But I guess it too, if you think about the sort of situations that would result in additional exposure, probably there are other emergencies that, you know, those crews would need to deal with, so I think a little bit more of a lenient timeline. would
I'm
be
sure
good.
too, if they come, I don't wanna speak for them, but that's just in the condition, if they said, hey, we can't get there in 21 days, but they're gonna get there in 24 days.
Yeah.
If they come down to the office and say, we're really trying,
yeah,
I'm not gonna hassle
Be-
or come into the commission and be like, it was day 23 and they were not doing with it. Like, I think it's just enough to say, hey, you gotta do it and do it timely. But if the island has lost power because we've had a big winter storm and a bunch is exposed, I totally get restoring
Yeah, I
service
think
before.
service is
cutting
more
it.
important, yeah.
So, I don't think that's the intent. Be pretty amazing.
I make a motion, we accept Jeff's recommendation.
Okay.
-2, -3, was that it?
Yes.
-4, wasn't it?
With the condition to
-4.
remove the line at 4 feet exposure within 21 days. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much for your
Thank you.
time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
-4 is for work being done that's actually not in a jurisdictional area.
Oh, okay.
We don't see a lot of negative fours.
okay, moving into minor modifications, Ivanov, 139 Pulpus Road.
For the applicant, Art Gasparo, Nantucket Engineering, I'm before you tonight to ask for a minor modification for work in the buffer zone to a vegetated wetland. You may recall, this is a quasi-vegetated wetland that's on a, when I say that, we believe the pond actually has a liner, but there's some wetland vegetation along the fringe, and it was located on the abutting property. So we went the conservative route, working for, this was a vacant piece of land that we have in order of conditions for residential development. And shown in red is the 25, 50, and 100-foot buffer zone. As you can see, the structure is just barely into your jurisdiction. And the line in green is the existing siltation fencing. The minor modification is for a slightly revised grading scheme in the buffer zone, and to also create a small earthen berm to direct the water. There's a larger section of this property which is subject to a conservation restriction, and it's wooded. And to avoid concerns with water running from the neighbor's site into, from our site into the neighbor's pond, we're proposing to just create a small, like 1 foot high, just dirt earth berm to make sure the water is directed to the north and it doesn't all run off from this site. And that's really the extent of the proposal. This area, there's no change in the limit of work that's been previously approved. The area was approved for residential landscaping and lawn. We didn't have a real detailed landscape plan, and they still don't. It's probably the side of the hill that you see there would most likely be essentially meadow type grasses that might get mowed once a year, if that, and then lawn along the top of the slope that you can see there from the contours.
Why doesn't it extend all the way to the property line? Why is it
because-
sort of just half of the?
It's basically, you know, it's somewhat graphic, but that's, you can see I pick it up at elevation 28.
Right.
It's because if you see the lay of the land, that's where the water's already
Okay.
going. I don't think you
Gotcha.
have to go. I think the water is, you can kind of see by the crook, if you will, or the angle point, maybe a better description, in the contours. It's just to catch that water. I don't think it has to go all the way over, because it's gonna fall into that slope. But I think it's gonna have to be sort of field constructed. Again, we're not talking about some major earthen berm, very, very small. It's just to try to keep things good between the neighbors who, you know, he's afraid the runoff's gonna go into his pond, and this is our solution, and given that it's in your jurisdiction, that's why we're here.
So it's very subtle.
Very
Yeah,
subtle.
I guess I just wish that we were starting to use more plants to try and absorb water before it hits the wetland, rather than just pushing it away. You know, I feel like we're kind of constantly doing that.
If I may, I think this is a combination where you do have a 25-foot undisturbed, heavily vegetated buffer. So, you know, it's kind of both, if you will. There is, you know, I mean, there's clearly gonna be, you know, again, this has a liner, you know, this pond, so we're not dealing as well with a, you know, pristine, high value type of a wetland system. But we're also maintaining the 25-foot buffer, because you do have that vegetation, you know, the fringe vegetation of wetland plants. And that's the idea, though, is, you know, to still have the 25, but not have, you know, this is a large site of all the water, all wants, you know, and that's what's happened in a storm, essentially, is that it's come rushing, you know, and there's silt fencing that's there. But, you know, for this large area, the idea is to not have, you know, I can only imagine a storm like yesterday, this 1-foot berm's not gonna make the difference. You know, there's still gonna be plenty of water going that way, but for your general, you know, the idea is to not have it all come off of this entire site onto it, you know, trying to be sensitive to neighbor relations, hydraulic trespass, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I totally appreciate it. I feel like on a site like this, it maybe should be vegetated to the 50, you know, to truly address if there's that much water and that big of a, you know, grade issue. But again,
If I could, I think that's essentially what's gonna happen, because he's not gonna have lawn on the side of the slope. And you can see the side of the slope is, you know, the 50, the top of the slope, where, you know, we're coming up that 5 feet or so. That side slope's not gonna be lawn, you know. But he doesn't want to invest in a whole lot of, like, extensive planting scheme for that either.
Just gonna let it grow in.
That's the idea.
I mean, lawns will absorb moisture too. They may not be as good as, they probably tend to get compressed a little bit, but,
Alright, any other questions? Questions from the public? Okay, is there a motion to approve the minor mod?
So moved.
Is there a second?
second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Passes unanimously. Moving into certificate of compliance, we have Jennifer Silver at 45 Starbuck Road.
Alright, so Jennifer Silver, 45 Starbuck Road, thanks, sir, was for, it's a 2013 order for an addition on an existing structure, some decks, an upgrade to an IA septic system. As you can see in your packet, that work was completed in compliance. They've received their certificate of compliance on the septic system from the Board of Health as well, and we are recommending the issuance of that certificate of compliance.
Move to issue.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to Bradley and Jean Marie Brewster, trustees at 29 Wall Street.
This is also one that was for some residential redevelopment that was there. That work has been completed, and we recommend issuing of this certificate of compliance as well.
Move to issue.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That carries unanimously. Moving on to David Cowitz at 323 Pulpus Road.
323 Pulpus Road. This was the kind of replacement of a pool with some fencing and some other residential redevelopment kind of as well. And we are recommending that this certificate of compliance could be issued, but with ongoing conditions 19, 20, and 21 related to the management of the pool. So it's kind of our standard.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Carries unanimously. Moving on to Monomoy LLC, 20 Monomoy Road.
We're actually going to request a continuance on this one until the 28th.
I'll continue until August 28th. Moving on to Lane at 74 Westchester Street.
This is a reissue of, C48, it's 432. They went to record it at some point or check on it, and it has been issued, but they lost it to record, so we're just issuing it for them to be able to record it.
Move to reissue.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that passes unanimously. On to Town of Nantucket, 54 Low Beach Road.
This was the project for the demolition of one of the old Coast Guard structures out on the Low Beach Barracks section.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of that crazy concrete block with the ginormous slab. So that has all been completed. That has been regraded and smoothed out, and there's actually vegetation starting to grow back in it already. So that work has been completed, and we're recommending a certificate of compliance on that as well.
Move the issue.
Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
The rats of Wisconsin, I gotta find somewhere new to live.
Oh, goodness. Sure, there's a lot. Okay, moving into orders of conditions.
We don't really have too many.
No, so.
So
Sure is a big list, but.
there's a big list. It's a lot of lists with not a lot of action.
Yeah.
That's gonna happen here.
Have
But that's all right. That's how it goes. I was ready if there was gonna be more, but
Unless it just one.
I have one more for the land bank one, but it's a separate page, so I will hand that one out when we get there. So the ones we have tonight, Madam Chairman, are the 13C3, so it's labeled as number 3, even though it's number 2. 102 Walnut Road, and then the Nantucket Island land bank for Walnut Pond. Everything else was continued.
Okay.
So we were gonna modify this one.
So which one we on?
So we are
I'm sorry,
on Andrew O'Brien and Sonia Anderson at 13 C Street.
So you wanted no
No, I don't
fertilizer,
have
do
it.
we have that actually added in there?
Right, so I know the older permit said no irrigation and no fertilizer allowed.
Okay, so then we don't have to emphasize that? And,
Well, I think we would have to put it in here.
yeah,
Yeah.
I would say so.
Not even any temporary, if they plant grass to do a little watering?
It did not allow it in the last one.
Well, it was irrigation, so I think that's why we had that
Irrigation, yeah.
discussion
So
of
they
a
can
hand watering.
water.
Yeah, if they just took a hose out there and
Yeah,
watered it a little.
hand
Right.
watering.
I don't think, to be
Well-
fair, I mean, they're working within an easement. I don't believe that the terms of the easement are allowing for them to install irrigation within it. So I don't think that they would have really the ability to irrigate it even if they try. I don't want to totally speak to the terms of it, but it's essentially a 5-foot wide easement. I'm not sure how they would effectively do that. I think it's for the purposes of access, not to progress. But I still think, I mean, you could put a condition 20, certainly it says no irrigation or fertilizers are permitted by the board.
Right.
Yeah.
So, move to approve as modified?
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that passes unanimously. Okay. And then on to 102 Walwinet Road, nominee trust at 102 Walwinet Road.
Oh, okay. This was the project that they had removed the boardwalk from last time.
Right.
And just had the walkway.
Pretty good to me. Is there
Yeah.
a motion?
Move to approve as drawn, as drafted.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So very neighborly.
Passes unanimously.
Wow.
Wow. And then do we have a draft for the land bank?
We do. Sorry, I done some other ones, and amazingly enough,
Oh, good.
all
Excellent.
didn't need to give you the whole booklet of everything. So they were all, those two are on the page together in the land bank. Land bank is front and back of the page.
So you wanted to add data collection? So I don't think we have this.
One on
Yeah,
25.
25.
Oh, is it? Okay. I missed that.
yeah, the vegetation survey.
Oh, and we should add and revegetation, because it doesn't say that, does it?
Right, to monitor what?
And what I thought we,
Revegetates.
the regrowth of native species, so we actually would like to know which they are.
26
Right.
does speak to that, I
So-
would say.
There's in condition 26, it has a should the project area show less than 50% regrowth of native species within the first 2 years and 6 months of the permit, the applicant shall file a new notice or amendment for supplementing the area with native plantings and or seedings.
So that covers it, really.
Okay.
It's not actual data collection.
Well, they have to be able to show that they're meeting that 50%. So they'd actually have to go out and
Okay.
collect that to say,
Right.
you know, if we have 10,000 square feet, then our coverage area is essentially at least 5,000 square feet. So they'd have to, it's incumbent upon them to demonstrate that they have vegetation covering at least 50% of the area.
Yeah, it's like a
The life of the
precondition to the
permit.
condition.
Yeah,
But
because it's not up to us to determine how they need to do the survey as long as they're doing the survey.
Yeah, and I'll say that's the condition that we put in for Hummock Pond, and that was kind of based upon the protocol that Sarah Boyce had put together for doing the vegetative work on that pond, was part of that discussion, so.
And it sounds like Rachel plans to use that design, so that's good to
Yeah.
have it
Yeah.
consistent, and,
I will say that consistency of data collection is something that a lot of the conservation groups that I know our office in the town are really working to pushing to have a lot of really standardized things. So when we go from work area to work area, the data is still comparable and done the same way. It makes it a lot easier for evaluating and comparing. Instead of being like, well, we did these 6 things and they did 6 different things. And it would be really nice if they could have done this.
well, this looks pretty much like what we've been permitting,
Yeah.
in which case, move to issue as drafted.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
That passes unanimously. Miracle. Okay, so on to extension of orders of conditions, 78 Walwinet Road LLC at 78 Walwinet Road.
78 Walnut Road, this is a project that has started, and they filed for the extension in compliance with state and local procedures. I know that the date on there, passed 4 days ago, but it was filed for prior to expiration, so it's still acceptable. But the project is in compliance and meets all the requirements to gain an extension, and they've requested an extension for 1 year, until next August of 2020.
So one-year extension.
Correct.
Move to issue the 1-year extension.
Is there a second?
Second, 1 year.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that passes unanimously. Okay, moving on to other business, approval of minutes.
I just have one clarification for the minutes in the commissioner's comment. I said in the regulator update, I'd like to discuss protection of eelgrass. What I proposed to discuss was the protection of native seed sources. I'm not sure how eelgrass got into that, where we're getting seed sources for restoration or mitigation plantings, and maybe I just wasn't speaking coherently at the end of the meeting.
It's very
but
possible.
I went and tried to look back at the video to make sure that I am not confusing it, but the audio at the end of the video was cut out, is unavailable, so I believe what I said was looking at the sources of the sources of seed and plugs and plant material, looking at those sources for restoration and mitigation plantings.
I remember that, so I'm.
Perfect.
Try, yeah.
Well, that's an easy adjustment to make.
What do you, please repeat what you wanted to read?
Discussing the source of restoration planting, seed, plug,
Restoration.
planting, seed, plug, or sapling material.
Saplings. Okay, et cetera.
Yeah, just the source of that material.
Okay. Any other comments on the minutes?
So I guess we need a motion to.
Yeah,
approve
do
this.
we have a motion to approve with that modification?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, monitoring reports. Okay. Oh, boy. All right, discussion of select board comments related to SBPF. So, I'm.
Do you want me to go first?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, for those who weren't at the select board meeting last week, and to kind of catch everyone up to current, the select board had a pretty extensive conversation on the process for appeals related to SBPF and kind of where we were in the process, and kind of the general rundown on how the procedure works. And that conversation evolved a bit more into a discussion of whether or not they should be authorizing town council, or what procedures they wanted to go through as far as how actively they wanted to defend the decision. And they ultimately ended up deciding to schedule an executive session to discuss the select board's position on the SBPF appeals. Subsequent to that, when we put it on our agenda as a courtesy to the select board, I passed on to George and to Libby that we were adding it to our agenda, because they have asked anytime that anything SBPF comes onto our agenda, just out of courtesy, please let us know. So that way, when we get calls to the office the next day or something happens, we at least know it was there. So I provided that to them and said, we've added this to our agenda. And then kind of the discussion of, well, were there concerns? I said, I think our board would like to discuss whether or not the select board is going to be, considering supporting the commission, or how it's going to go. That turned into that being passed along to the chair and vice chair of the select board, who have then since reached out individually to speak to Ashley, who is our chair, and I'll let her talk about that in a second. But since then as well, they have requested, they've scheduled this discussion for their executive session on the 12th of September at 9 a.m. They have requested the presence of the chair and vice chair, if possible, from the commission. If that is not possible, because I know you'll be teaching school.
What time is that?
It's 9 a.m. That they've also said we can select a couple designees to go. I'll be there as well, but that's, I think they would just like to have a couple members of the board there. I don't think they want to have both, because then you get into having to post a joint session of everybody, and scheduling for that gets a little dicey. So I think that's what they would like to do at this point. Again, that's not till the 12th, so.
Okay, well, I
Yeah,
can
so
be there.
I guess we'll need to talk to you a little bit more about timing, how long it would run.
So, just to touch on that, executive session for the select board, they tend to be pretty variable in length of times. Some are, especially for some matters, the discussions sometimes are 10 minutes, sometimes they're 2 hours and 10 minutes. My gut feeling tells me on an issue like this, you'd probably be looking at minimum of an hour to hour and a half typically for some of these discussions to go on. That's my total gut guess.
And did you say the 12th?
Correct, of September.
Okay. Are they discouraging having other members of the commission there?
Well, they have just asked for the chair and vice chair specifically at this point. Honestly, I think some of it is just to avoid having to post a joint meeting and then having both boards make quorum at that time.
Okay.
I didn't ask, so they just said, would the chair and vice chair be available to attend this executive session? And then the follow-up sentence was, and please add it to your schedule. So
Okay.
I didn't get the choice.
I'll be there.
That's good. That
Yeah,
they're
I do too.
Extending a courtesy to
Yes.
us.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm
And Ian,
very
I hope
pleased.
you're gonna go, I hope.
Yes, absolutely.
And Jeff will go, right?
And I'll
I was
be
told
there.
that I had to add it to
Yeah,
my
you
schedule.
need to be there.
Oh,
to
okay,
do
well,
that.
that's good to
Yeah.
hear. I'm glad they're
Yes.
doing this.
I don't get it.
Can it be done so that actually, I mean.
I'll be there.
You-
I
you
will,
can-
I
you can
will
make it
request,
happen.
I get 3 personal days. This will be one of them,
Wow,
so.
Good.
there goes Disneyland, huh?
Or,
I mean, I'm just hoping that the select board has taken their time to review the 10 months of testimony that we have gone through before this meeting. That would be my statement on that one.
Well, I
Yeah.
talked to a member of the board,
Mm-hmm.
and I definitely got the impression there was differences of opinion, but there clearly are members of the board that would support, taking this as far as it needs to go.
So,
I don't know if it's a majority or not, but it's not like, I think from watching that video, it seemed like one member, Matt in particular, really spent a lot of time on his opinion, and most of the other members were pretty quiet.
Right, and I think some of what Matt said was incorrect as well in terms of the past history of what happened beforehand. And since we have some newer members on the select board, that was very concerning to me, very concerning. Because I think we've got to, we can't have any people making decisions based on bad information, and after, as you say, I was at most of those meetings, but on the other side, and I'm certainly aware of all the work you all did and everything everyone had to review, and so it's, I'm glad they are extending the courtesy. I have to say, I'm surprised it wasn't done before. I mean, when I heard about this, I was surprised. So I'm glad they are inviting you guys.
I was again told that this meeting was really more to discuss the process of what the potentials are, what happens if we do this, what about this, what happens after this, and that's what most of it was. And as Jeff said, it just it started to evolve into kind of a little bit more in depth of,
I would say as someone who was sitting there, based upon what was posted on their agenda, that conversation definitely evolved past what was posted. And I think they were honestly looking for George to give them so when you appeal on the state path, it goes to the DEP.
Right.
This is how this procedure goes. If that decision's issued, there's 10 days to appeal, and it goes to the, Office of Dispute and Resolution for here. It goes through that process to go through there, and then step them through the Superior Court process. I know that's what he and I had both prepared to discuss at that meeting. But I think as everyone goes to select board meetings, sometimes conversations take on a life of their own with questions or concerns, or someone has a question at the time. I mean, our hearings do it too, where they get off onto tangents, but I know, I don't think it was their intent to go over what their position was individually at that meeting, but be that as it's may, I don't think it ever hurts to sit down. I know in the last SPPF hearing, we had suggested having a joint meeting between the commission and the select board at some point to go over it, and they weren't interested at the time, and then that project kind of went away, and now the 4,000-foot project was there, kind of post the settlement group and all of that that went on in the last one. So I don't know. I think having a conversation with at least portions of the board, and personally as the administrator, I've encouraged that the chair and vice chair of the select board both individually reached out to at least have a conversation with our chair to at least communicate back and forth. That's more than what it has been in the past at times. So I think that's encouraging. And like I said to them in a comment, is we can disagree, that's totally fine, but it needs to at least be conducted in a positive manner, in a professional manner, where you're communicating back and forth. So not it's us against them, against them, against them. So well, we're gonna figure out what's best, and if reviews differ and opinions are different, so be it. But that's our job, is to do our job and give them the best professional advice that we can, and do that as many as we want to do. So.
Yeah, I watched a video from the select board, and the only question or concern I potentially have is that I know the DEP site visit was going to happen, now has been postponed. And I appreciate the select board asking our chair and vice chair to come to their executive session, but if the DEP site visit happens before that, yeah, it's gonna happen before that, can we be more active in pushing the select board? I know they said George would be there, but there was some clarification about whether he would take a active stand or not. Can we make a comment to them about whether?
Sure. So just to explain too, because I know not everyone here has gone through DEP site visits before, and having done 2 yesterday with DEP, they're not a really big testimony gathering kind of event. So it's something where I think if the select board wanted to have George put comment into DEP, I think that is something that is independent of the field visit itself. It's not something that he would be providing at the field visit. It's something that it would be more likely to draft a brief of some kind or summary. The nice part for the town and the town's position is obviously the main piece of testimony that we provide to DEP is the record and then the order that goes with it. And I know that's something that George and I both felt very comfortable about when it was signed and put forward, that draft was an order that at the time, in his words to me, were he would be ready to defend that and felt comfortable defending how that was written for whatever appellate it was in. I mean, that's how we write all of our orders, and anything that goes through, whether he is authorized or not, he was authorized to help us draft it. So for him, it's very much well, if I have to defend it, I want to make sure that it's right from the start. And George said it at that meeting, and I know he takes great pride in the fact that he's never lost an appeal that's been against the commission. So,
well, building on what Seth said, when I watched the meeting, my impression was that George was said that he felt that it was important to prepare a brief before they came down here. And so perhaps I misunderstood, but that was the take I had. And so I was a bit surprised when it seemed that they were only giving him permission to turn up when DEP's representatives came down here, rather than to have a brief prepared before they came down. So could you address that, or do you think that's a concern that we should make sure that the select board is aware of?
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as timing goes, and again, kind of talking about, and just even hearing the words from them yesterday, when they're here for field visits, obviously they're hearing from kind of all sides for what was the project that was proposed, what did the commission decide, how did they arrive at that, and there's some discussion to there. The appellant party, in this case, is the actual applicant, so it's a lot simpler. There's not an aggrieved party who's saying why they're aggrieved. So it'll essentially be a description of the project. This is what the project is. This is what the commission decided. This is how they decided it. We'll probably all go view the site. And then they typically take, in their timeline that they presented to us yesterday, for the two appeals. So yesterday we viewed Gingy Lane, the request for determination appeal, and then out at Nantucket Marine, their timeline estimate for issuing a superseding order of conditions was no sooner than about 60 days from the site visit. So it's something where there's a pretty significant amount of time, because there's a lot of other appeals and things that are there. So I'm not convinced that that would be something that would need to be prepared prior to the site visit. In my opinion, in defending the appeal, I actually think going through the site visit and seeing how that is presented and viewed would aid in putting together a brief to address any other concerns that were raised from that field visit, and then having kind of a succinct document that covers the points and then addresses anything that's raised separately. My concern with those is the more information that they get, it's just like any other board or reviewer, is the more pages you're asking people to read, the less likely I feel like they're all going to be thoroughly read. And it's something where I think putting together, beyond the record and the decision of the commission and videos and minutes and all of those things that go with it, having a really dialed in brief, I think, is something that would be important. And if there's something that comes up, I won't say as a surprise, I don't think there's anything called a surprise with that project anymore, but anything that comes up that needs to be addressed, I think being able to address it would be important.
And I just want to comment, I think it was, George, I think, handled the issue where there seemed to be a question about whether he would go or not, or what have you. As a lawyer, I was kind of surprised that the issue even came up, because we, the town, both our commission and the select board, would certainly want to have our council there to be, at the least to be observing what's going on, because it really sounds like they're doing their, on-site investigation, and it's not a time or place to argue, or, they may ask questions or what have you, but I think obviously having George there is really important, and I'm really glad that they're, that got decided, but I was really surprised that it had to get decided. So it's kind of how it's rolling out in a way.
Yeah.
So
And I'll say too, and yesterday for the on-sites, and this has been the case for all of the on-sites I've ever participated in. DEP makes it very clear up front that there is no back and forth, right? There's no interrupting.
Right.
There's none of that. It is very much like you say your piece, you say your piece, and if there are any other questions or things that are there, they are pretty iron-fisted in how they run those on-sites. They don't deviate too much. They don't have their little style to how they do it, but they sign everybody in, they set the ground rules, and then they kind of dictate how that procedure goes, and they have no problem saying you need to stop talking because it's not your turn. I saw it yesterday.
Mhm.
Not that that's
Oh.
a huge surprise, but they're pretty good about keeping field visits to field visits.
So Jeff, since these meetings are, closed sessions, can you and Ian or whoever, and if Ashley goes, can you then communicate things to us in an open session that were discussed in closed session? How does that work?
No, but I think what may subsequently result from that is because we have pending litigation, if we ever get served with it, pending litigation for the hearing is we would qualify for that exemption of executive session as well. So, and then in executive session, you can discuss what happened in other executive sessions. I will say always with the caveat to that is, at some point, the minutes from executive sessions do have to get released to the public. But there's rules and timing of how those be. So, for members of the public, I wouldn't say because it's been 2 weeks that you're gonna get to see the minutes of that. It's something that usually once the matter is resolved and the litigation has ceased, those minutes have kind of a time frame to be released to the public. So, there are rules that bind, and there are only certain reasons that you can have executive session. Pending litigation to discuss strategy is one of those exemptions. So. But we would do it at probably, I mean, we've done executive sessions as part of regular hearing days before. I'm not saying that's always ideal, or we can have it, or we could even do it in place of the field viewings and post it and have that available too, so.
Well, I have to say, I am happy they've invited us to the
Yes.
executive
Yeah, no kidding.
session,
I am
and
too.
That's great.
honestly, pleasantly surprised that that's happening, so,
I may stay at my feet, I'll keep it. So.
yeah.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
Well, I guess my opinion, again, after talking to the board member, that most of the members did not want to get into any kind of back and forth about, what's appropriate, because they were in open session, and they wanted to save it for the executive session. So I don't think we should put a whole lot of concern into that particular meeting,
Right.
especially now that they are gonna go forward, and I have a lot of faith in George. He's really been good for the commission, and I think he'll do the right thing as he sees fit as much as anything. I mean, if they say, no, we're not gonna file an appeal, then George can't just go file an appeal, but as far as handling the process, I think George is very well qualified to do that, and I think he'll do a good job.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, good. I'm glad we put it up for discussion, because that seems to have
Well, and I,
brought it to their attention.
yes, and I think, and I don't know how I missed that the select board was getting updated on SBPF, but the same, the select board was told that SBPF is on our agenda, if we could be kept in the
Absolutely.
loop of when the select board is
Right.
discussing this openly, just so, I know you were
Mhm.
present, but so we can maybe be present, or at least,
Yeah, I think that would be a help if,
So,
if
I'll
you
be
could
fair,
let us know.
I was really only present because we were discussing the pond management principles before
Oh.
then.
So
And
just
only
happened.
because I was going through the agenda before then, did I really know that it was on, so.
Should probably start checking their agenda. I never look at it, cause it's like usually.
But
a-
I'll
Right.
try to keep
Right.
tabs on it, and if it comes up again, I'll definitely share that around with everybody.
thank you,
Trouble is, they're the same nights we are.
right.
Yeah, but by this time, last Wednesday, when we were discussing it, they had not started talking about it yet.
Mm.
We've been good. We have an hour head start on it, we just gotta
Yeah.
stay
Right.
quick. And that was honestly the last thing on the agenda, so.
Right.
I know I got home at 9:30. It was awesome.
And your daughter was fast asleep, right?
All of my children are fast asleep.
That's good.
I think my wife was fast asleep too. Everyone was asleep. Just the dog. Dog and puppy for us.
Oh, the puppies. Okay, so is there no further discussion? We'll keep everybody posted, hopefully, on anything that comes up. On to reports, crack,
Nothing happening.
okay, CPC,
That's Joe.
not here.
He's not here.
NP and EDC,
No meeting this month.
okay, and no mosquito control committee, so that's done. Commissioners' comments?
Again,
The sound is awful
Yeah.
here.
as Seth was saying, I mean, it's like you're watching a pantomime half the time. And so I don't know if we can have handheld mics or if we just insist people sit down, which seems awkward, but
I
You
think
know,
for the
it-
time being, that's probably what we're.
yeah.
I just have one issue that I don't know if we have jurisdiction over or can do anything about, but I want to bring it up anyways. So on Nobodere Ave, which is the road that goes to Nobodere Beach, there's been an increased enforcement of police ticketing people parking. The parking on the road is on the left side of the road, and in order to not get a ticket, you need to turn around so you're facing away from the airport. So you're facing on the right side of the road, going, back towards Surfside. And people are being lazy about following this regulation. So instead of turning their car all the way around, they're just pulling their car perpendicular up into the vegetation. Unfortunately, it's outside of our resource areas. I checked the closest jurisdictional areas 180 feet away. I asked the police if they could ticket these vehicles for not parking in the way they're supposed to be, but they said as long as they're perpendicular, they don't have any authority to do anything about it. I guess I didn't contact the landowner, which I believe is the land bank, to see if they could put up fencing, but
They're the
I
ones.
don't know if we have any authority over something like that or not.
The land bank might.
Yeah, the
be
land
willing to
bank
put a
would put
fence
So
up
up.
weirdly
posts.
enough, at the same time, I'll try to dig it out for everybody. You actually might.
And I do have pictures of this behavior if anyone wants to see it.
Yeah, if you email them to me, I
Yeah.
think that would be great. So, the legislative authority for conservation commissions does include the ability to protect open space.
Mhm.
The statutory protections that were granted in our actual regulatory authority comes to protecting wetland resource areas, but the enabling legislation of all of it does include the commission's, just trying to get the Conservation Commission Act focused on promotion and development of natural resources and protection of watershed resources. So they include things in there like open space management. So I think that's something where open space and the open space plan for a very long time has kind of resided in planning. And I'm not saying this is an open space plan issue, but I do think it's something that if the commission wanted to simply even send a letter to the land bank and the police and said, hey, we have some concerns with people damaging the natural vegetation in this area, it's a sensitive area, could we please work together to resolve this permanently? I think that's something that you could at least foster that discussion.
Yeah, and in the specific area where
Oh,
this is
yeah.
happening, it's not a jurisdictional area, but it is in the general vicinity of coastal dune, coastal beach, some other wetland areas there. I have to check the land ownership to make sure that it is the land bank rather than private, but I believe it is because they have a parking lot there. So I think it's just lazy on the behalf of people driving there to not turn the whole way around, and
I think it's happening at many of
Yeah.
our beaches.
I'm sure it
unfortunately.
is.
It's not,
It's just
yeah.
crazy.
yeah, I'm sure it is, but
It is worth contacting the land bank.
This is south of
Why don't we
Propaganda
just,
Point.
do we need a motion to ask Jeff
Is
to
that-
contact the land bank?
I think,
Authorized choir?
so Jeff, would we need a motion to authorize you to contact the land bank?
It's always helpful.
I move that Jeff contact the land bank to address the issue of parking as Seth outlined.
Is there a
I
second?
second that, absolutely.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yeah.
And thank you, Seth, for raising
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just Nobodere.
yeah.
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 So just real quickly, I'll send this around to everybody, because there's an actual, this Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 8C is the actual establishment of conservation commissions. It's not the Wetlands Protection Act that establishes conservation commissions. In it, there's very interesting, but some of the things that are very clear that are in there, You know, you have such commission shall conduct research into its local land areas and seek to coordinate the activities of unofficial bodies for similar purposes. You can prepare and distribute books, maps, charts, plans, pamphlets, necessary for its word. Among such plans may be a conservation and passive outdoor recreation plan. So all of these things go through there that are something that, I will be fair in saying, not very many conservation commissions in Mass do, because everyone just works through the workload of wetland applications. But there are a lot of abilities that are granted through Mass General law that we could be doing if people wanted to be more involved in those. So I'll send this around
Great.
to everybody.
Thank
that
you.
would be great.
Yeah.
Just to see.
I'm looking at the GIS maps now too, and there is a possibility that the area the parking was happening was a private owner, not the land bank. The land bank has a parcel just around the parking lot, but the area I'm talking about is further down the road, and it looks like that's held by private landowner.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I think
It's worth reaching out.
Yeah.
I think if reaching out to the land bank and even reaching out, maybe coordinated with the land bank to the police to say, this is something that's important, please don't. And if it means hammering some signs up, we can talk to the DPW about, hey, let's mark the way to say,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
park this way only, do not park in vegetation. And then if there's a sign that says it and there's something behind it, the police can issue warnings or tickets or do what's necessary. I don't necessarily say it will get fixed for the remainder of this beach season,
Yeah.
but I think as we go into 2020, I think that will be excellent.
Any other comments? Okay, administrator staff reports.
No, I'll hold off. Nothing pressing, especially because it's 5 to 8.
Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
There certainly is.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.